I'm Sarah Mitchell, and 24 hours ago, my parents cut me off completely after I refused to pay for my sister's wedding. They said I was selfish and ungrateful. What they didn't know was that I had been secretly managing their finances for months, and with one phone call, I was about to freeze every account they had. Before I tell you how I turned their world upside down, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you've ever been the family scapegoat who finally fought back. Growing up in suburban Denver, I was always the responsible one. While my younger sister Emma got to be the free spirit, the artist, the one who could do no wrong, I was expected to be practical, reliable, and invisible. My parents, David and Linda Mitchell, ran a small accounting firm that barely stayed afloat, but they had big dreams for Emma's future. She was going to be a famous photographer, travel the world, create beautiful art. Me, I was just supposed to handle the boring stuff. I graduated valedictorian from high school, got a full scholarship to study finance at the University of Colorado, and landed a job at a prestigious investment firm straight out of college. My parents attended my graduation, sure, but they spent the entire reception talking about Emma's upcoming art show. When I got promoted to senior analyst at 26, making more money than both my parents combined, their response was lukewarm congratulations, followed by excitement about Emma's latest photography project. The pattern was always the same. Emma's achievements were celebrated, discussed, shared with everyone they knew. Mine were acknowledged with a polite nod before the conversation shifted back to their golden child. Emma got the emotional support, the financial backing, the belief in her dreams. I got expectations and criticism when I didn't meet them perfectly. 2 years ago, Emma announced she was getting married to Jake, a struggling musician she'd been dating for 6 months. My parents were thrilled. They immediately started planning this elaborate wedding, talking about venues and flowers and photographers. The budget kept growing and growing. $50,000, then $75,000. The problem was, they didn't have $100,000. Their business was struggling, had been for years. They were behind on their mortgage, had maxed out credit cards, and were borrowing money just to keep the lights on. But somehow, they were convinced they could make Emma's fairy tale wedding happen. That's when they came to me. Not asking for advice on how to budget or scale back the wedding. They wanted me to pay for it, just like that. They sat me down in their living room, Emma and Jake there too, and presented it like I should be honored to fund this disaster. "Sarah, you're doing so well financially," my mother said, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I knew so well. "And Emma's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event." My father nodded along. "It's what family does. We help each other out." Except they wouldn't. They'd never offered to help me with anything. Not my student loans, not my car payment when I was starting out, not even a graduation gift that wasn't from the clearance rack. But now they expected me to drop 6 figures on a wedding for someone who barely acknowledged my existence, unless she needed something. "I'm not paying for Emma's wedding," I said simply. The room went silent. Emma's face crumpled like I'd just told her she was adopted. My parents looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Sarah, don't be ridiculous," my father said. "This is your sister's wedding." Selfish. There it was. The word they'd been throwing at me my entire life whenever I didn't immediately cave to their demands. When I chose to study finance instead of supporting Emma's art career. When I moved out instead of staying home to help with the family business. When I focused on my own life instead of making everything about Emma. "I'm not being selfish," I replied, my voice steady, despite the anger building inside me. "I'm being realistic." Emma finally spoke up, her voice shaking with tears. "I can't believe you're doing this to me. I'm not ruining anything. You can still have a beautiful wedding." But they weren't hearing it. The conversation devolved into accusations and tears. with Emma sobbing about her ruined dreams and my parents lecturing me about family loyalty. Finally, my father stood up, his face red with anger. And that's when my mother delivered the final blow. "We're done enabling your selfishness, Sarah." They actually thought this was a threat, like I was some dependent child who couldn't survive without their approval. They had no idea that I'd been quietly managing their financial crisis for months, trying to help them without them even knowing it. You see, about 6 months earlier, my father had come to me in a panic. The business was failing, they were facing foreclosure, and their credit was destroyed. He begged me to help them get back on their feet. Not with money, but with my expertise. I agreed to help because despite everything, I didn't want to see them lose their home. I spent weeks analyzing their finances, restructuring their debt, and setting up new accounts to help them rebuild their credit. I became the authorized user on most of their accounts, helped them consolidate their loans, and even co-signed for a business line of credit to keep their firm afloat. All of this was done quietly, without Emma knowing, because they were embarrassed about their financial situation. What they didn't realize was that in helping them, I'd gained access to almost everything: bank accounts, credit cards, business accounts, investment portfolios. I had legitimate authorization on all of it because they'd given it to me when they were desperate. They'd signed papers making me a joint account holder, given me power of attorney for their business dealings, and authorized me to act on their behalf with their creditors. I'd been using this access responsibly, of course, making sure their bills were paid, their credit was improving, their business was stabilizing. I'd been the invisible hand keeping their lives together while they planned their daughter's fantasy wedding with money they didn't have. But now they'd cut me off, called me selfish, told me I wasn't the daughter they thought I was, over a wedding they couldn't afford for a daughter who'd never shown me an ounce of gratitude or respect. I went home that night and sat in my apartment, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 28 years of being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who fixed everyone else's problems while they celebrated Emma's every breath. I'd just saved their financial lives, and their response was to disown me because I wouldn't fund their latest irresponsible decision. That's when I realized I was done. Done being taken for granted. Done being the family ATM. Done being treated like my only value was what I could do for them financially. I picked up my phone and started making calls. The first call was to their primary bank. As a joint account holder, I had every right to freeze the accounts pending a review of some suspicious activity I'd noticed. The customer service representative was very helpful, especially when I mentioned some large upcoming transactions that seemed inconsistent with their usual spending patterns. The second call was to their business bank. Same story. As someone with power of attorney for their business accounts, I was concerned about some irregular activity and wanted to temporarily freeze everything until we could review it together. The third call was to their credit card companies. I was worried about potential fraud and wanted to temporarily suspend their cards as a precaution. By midnight, every account they had access to was frozen. Their personal checking, savings, business accounts, credit cards, even the line of credit I'd helped them establish. All of it locked down, pending further review. I didn't sleep much that night. Part of me felt guilty for what I'd done, but a bigger part of me felt something I hadn't felt in years: relief. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to fix their problems. For once, they were going to have to face the consequences of their choices. My phone started ringing at 7 in the morning. It was my father, and he was panicking. "Sarah, something's wrong with our accounts. None of our cards are working, and the bank says everything's been frozen." I let him talk for a few minutes, listening to his growing desperation as he described trying to pay for wedding deposits and being unable to access their funds. Finally, I interrupted him. "Oh, that was me." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I mean exactly what I said. I froze them, all of them. You can't do that. Actually, I can. Remember when you were facing foreclosure and begged me to help you? Remember all those papers you signed giving me access to your accounts? Remember making me a joint account holder and giving me power of attorney? I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Sarah, this isn't funny. We have bills to pay. And yesterday you told me I wasn't the daughter you thought I was and cut me off from the family. I'm completely serious. You want to know what selfish looks like? Selfish is expecting your daughter to pay for a wedding you can't afford while treating her like garbage. Selfish is spending money you don't have on a party while your business is failing. My mother grabbed the phone. Sarah, please. We need access to our money. No, you don't. You're going to cancel the wedding. The elaborate, expensive wedding you can't afford. We can't cancel everything now. You should have thought about that before you decided to cut me off. Actions have consequences, Mom. Emma got on the phone next, sobbing hysterically. Sarah, please don't do this to me. I'm not ruining your life, Emma. I'm just not funding your fantasy. I hung up the phone and turned it off. I needed some time to think about my next move. Over the next few days, they tried everything. They called me from different numbers, sent emails, even showed up at my apartment building. But I wasn't ready to talk yet. I needed them to understand that their actions had consequences. By the end of the week, reality had set in. Without access to their accounts, they couldn't pay for any of the wedding expenses. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, the florist, all of it had to be cancelled. Emma's dream wedding was officially off. That's when my father called from his business phone, his voice defeated. Sarah, we get it. We messed up. I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, they looked terrible. My father had dark circles under his eyes. My mother looked like she'd been crying for days, and Emma was practically catatonic. We're sorry, my mother said as soon as I sat down. We never should have called you selfish or cut you off. You thought I was your personal ATM. My father nodded miserably. You're right. We took advantage of you. Emma finally spoke up. I'm sorry too. I never realized how much you've done for us. Mum and Dad told me about how you saved the business, how you've been helping with everything. Of course you didn't. The conversation continued for over an hour. They apologized, acknowledged their mistakes, and begged me to unfreeze the accounts. They promised things would be different, that they'd treat me better, that they'd respect my boundaries. But I wasn't done yet. Here's what's going to happen, I said, pulling out a folder I'd prepared. I slid a document across the table. This is a financial management agreement. The agreement was comprehensive. They would submit to a monthly budget I created. All major expenses over $1,000 had to be approved by me. The wedding budget was capped at $15,000, still more than most people spend, but reasonable for their situation. Emma would get a job to help pay for her own wedding expenses, and most importantly, they would attend family therapy to address the favoritism and dysfunction that had led to this situation. This is pretty controlling, my father said after reading through it. No more controlling than are you trying to force me to pay for a wedding I never agreed to fund. The difference is, I'm actually trying to help you succeed financially. They signed the agreement. What choice did they have? Over the next few months, things gradually improved. Emma's scaled-down wedding was actually beautiful, intimate, personal, and within their means. She did get a job, her first real job ever, and seemed to gain some appreciation for what it meant to work for something. My parents stuck to the budget, and their financial situation stabilized. The business started turning a profit again. Most importantly, they started treating me like a person instead of a resource. The family therapy helped too. It gave us a space to address years of accumulated resentment and favoritism. Emma began to understand how her privileged position had affected our relationship. My parents started to see how their financial dependence on me had created an unhealthy dynamic. It wasn't perfect. Years of dysfunctional patterns don't disappear overnight. But it was progress. 6 months later, my father called me with good news. The business had recovered enough that they could start paying me back for all the help I'd provided over the years. They'd also set up a savings account for Emma's future financial needs, so they wouldn't have to rely on me again. "We want to take you to dinner," he said. At dinner, my mother handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $25,000, partial repayment for all the financial support I'd provided over the years, plus interest. "We know it's not enough," she said, "but it's a start." Emma surprised me with a photo album she'd created, documenting all the times I'd helped the family over the years. School projects I'd helped her with, financial crises I'd solved, problems I'd fixed while getting no recognition. "I never realized how much you did for us," she said, tears in her eyes. Looking back, freezing their accounts was extreme, but it was also necessary. Sometimes people don't understand the value of what they have until they lose it. My parents had taken my help for granted for so long that they'd forgotten I was a person with feelings and boundaries, not just a solution to their problems. The experience taught me that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential. For years, I'd enabled their financial irresponsibility and emotional manipulation because I thought that's what family was supposed to do. But real family relationships require mutual respect and reciprocity. Emma's wedding ended up being perfect, not because it was expensive, but because it was authentic. She and Jake are still married 3 years later, and they've built a stable life together based on their own efforts, not family subsidies. My parents' business is thriving now, and they've maintained the financial discipline they learned during our agreement period. More importantly, our relationship is healthier than it's ever been. As for me, I learned that my worth isn't determined by what I can do for other people. I'm not the family ATM or the problem solver who exists to make everyone else's life easier. I'm a person who deserves respect and consideration, and I'm willing to enforce that boundary when necessary. Sometimes you have to be willing to freeze everything to get people's attention. Sometimes you have to show them what life looks like without you before they'll appreciate what you bring to their lives. Have you ever been taken for granted by family members who only valued what you could do for them? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries and standing up for yourself. Remember, you teach people how to treat you, and sometimes that lesson requires consequences they'll never forget.